I think it's really important that people go into looking at cloud adoption with their eyes wide open and recognize that no platform is going to be 100% and that no platform is a panacea.
Technology is transforming how we think, how we lead, and how we win. From Intervision, this is Status Go, the show helping IT leaders move beyond the status quo, master their craft, and propel their IT vision.
Hello and welcome to Status Go. I'm Alicia Gaba, the SVP of Marketing here at Intervision, and I have with me today Kevin Barker, who's a technical director at Intervision also, and he's based in Southern California. Thanks for joining me today, Kevin.
Oh, thank you, Alicia. It's my pleasure to be here.
Our plan today is to talk about why organizations are choosing one cloud or another, really focusing primarily on AWS, Azure, and GCP. But before we dive in, Kevin, why don't you share a little bit about your background?
Sure. Well, it pains me to say this, but I'm actually been in the technology industry for over 40 years. Started out a long time ago, back in the nascent days of mini computers as a quality assurance tester. Then got into coding and programming, and eventually management, and forgot all my technical skills, and then relearned them again on the way as I moved over to the value-added reseller community. And now I'm very happy to be here with Intervision Systems. I run our professional services practice from a pre-sales perspective here in the Southern California area. And one of the things that I do on a pretty regular basis is have discussions with customers about cloud and what does it mean and how do we get there and all that other stuff that we're going to delve into a little bit today.
Great. So let's start from the top. Let's talk about the landscape of the clouds that exist out there today. So share your perspective on that. Specifically, how has that landscape changed, and what's going on today?
Sure. If we look at the landscape today and we compare it to where we were 3 4 years ago, we've seen a massive winnowing out of a lot of players. And in fact, if you have access to the latest Gartner infamous Magic Quadrant, they really only classify 6 players in the cloud space. So they've got 3 in the leader quadrant, which are obviously Amazon Web Services way up there in the upper right, and then Microsoft and Google, and then they put Alibaba from China, Oracle, and IBM in the niche players. And I think that's a pretty fair uh, visit view of the landscape today. Amazon obviously created the space, owned it. No one else really was competitive for a while, and then you saw everybody and his cousin jumping in with cloud offerings. Microsoft being one of the most aggressive, and then Google waking up and going, "Oh, we need to compete here." And if we look at the numbers, we still see Amazon as a pretty significant leader. Last year, they had about 50% of the overall cloud market, but Azure, Microsoft's solution, had come on really strong and had a little over 40%. Google was a massively distant third at around 4%, and then all the rest was spread out amongst the niche players. But over the last year, what's been the most interesting thing is to see how Google has just exploded. When they get behind something, sometimes they fail, but most of the time they win, and they usually win big. And we see that because the cloud market itself overall is continuing to grow aggressively, but Google's share has gone from about 4% last year to 24%, and that is in a 12-month period. And so their growth rate is, depending on how you measure it, somewhere between 80 and 220%.
That's nothing to snuff at, right? What do
No.
you feel like that's most attributed to?
To me, there's 2 pieces to it. First, Google had come forward with a differentiated set of offerings. So every single vendor obviously has strengths and weaknesses. And Google's biggest strength has really been their play in two areas. One is in the container space. I mean, Google really developed the Kubernetes standard that AWS and Azure copied. And so containerization, DevOps expertise, Google is extremely strong there. They're also very good at scaling and load balancing. And most importantly, their analytics and their emphasis on deep learning, AI, machine learning. These are all real strengths for Google as a company. And they've brought those capabilities forward into the cloud space. And it really shows with customer adoption. And there's one other thing, which is they're cheap. I mean, they will typically discount 50, 60%. And actually, a third component is they're aggressive. We have one of our larger enterprise customers here in Southern California underwent a very extensive analysis of the three cloud platforms. And they're an enterprise customer. And, frankly, that's not where Google's strength is. But they chose Google in large part because of the aggressiveness of the team and their willingness to work with them to put together a solution that really mapped to their business requirements, whereas Amazon kind of treated them like another customer.
And what are you seeing in terms of the use cases? Are there differences in terms of the use cases that are more typical for one cloud or another?
Yes, there are. And I think that that's a really important thing for customers to take a look at is to say, what is it we're trying to do with the cloud from a business perspective? What is the nature and the beast of our applications? What is our infrastructure like? And where are we in the what I'll call the cloud development lifecycle. So looking at where does Microsoft play well, for example, they're really, really large in the Midwest and in the mid-tier enterprise, and they're really making tremendous gains with customers that have embraced the Microsoft solution set. So if you are a big MS SQL player or you do a lot of SharePoint or Office 365 is a cornerstone to your environment and your applications are built on those platforms, then Microsoft is a very obvious and really intelligent solution. Again, Google, if you're looking for heavy emphasis in machine learning or analytics, or massive number crunching, even though that is an area where Amazon does well. But when you factor in the Google price point, Google's a great solution. On the other hand, if you want to go and you've just got a whole bunch of business apps and scalability and the ability to ratchet up and ratchet down very quickly is important to you, Amazon is a very good choice. So I think you have to sit down, map out what your key business requirements are, and then use the internet, use companies like us, or people like me, and map those requirements to each one of the cloud vendors to pick the one or two that work best for you. And I will also say, don't forget the niche players because they're out there and they serve purposes.
Yeah, let's talk about some of those niche players. What are you seeing in terms of, I'll call it the exception to the norm, which is typically in AWS, Azure, or GCP?
Sure. When you look at the niche players today, you really only have three. You have IBM, you have Oracle, and you have Alibaba out of China. You can read some reports, and they'll talk about a couple other Chinese entities like Huawei. Or Tencent, who is a big in the gaming space. But unless you have something that really maps to them or you want the Chinese to get to your data, they're probably not good choices. But IBM, Oracle, and Alibaba all do have value and could really fit your business requirements. So if you have a customer and they're a really large Oracle shop and their entire infra is built on Oracle databases, then frankly, Oracle's a fantastic choice because they're going to work with you, give you the ability to pick up that infrastructure and just using the term lift and shift, move it right into the cloud with almost a seamless transition. And for a lot of companies, that's one of the biggest challenges is how do you get in there? Well, Oracle's going to make it really easy if you're on that platform. Whereas someone like an IBM, again, if you fit into you're an existing what Gartner would call a mode one classic data center type customer and you've got a big IBM presence in your data center, IBM is a very good fit. And especially if you are more of a global IBM customer, because they've got offices and support teams and localization efforts done everywhere. So that's a good reason to take a look at the IBM platform. And then Alibaba, a really big player in China. I was looking the other day, and I think they have something like 40% of the cloud business in mainland China. So if I'm a company and I'm looking to expand into China, or I'm in China with a classic infrastructure and I want to move it into the cloud, and language localization is important to me, Alibaba makes a lot of sense. They have very little presence in the US. They've got one or two cloud data centers, and that's about it. But if I need to get into China, that's a good company to look at.
So you're clearly very well versed in the clouds. What's your take on private cloud?
Oh, private cloud. Yes, we all love private cloud. Not. That's a really fun question to tackle. So I was thinking about it the other day because I have some friends that work for some really classic legacy hardware vendors. And when I look at the private cloud, who is the biggest champion of the private cloud? Frankly, it's those legacy hardware vendors, right? Because they're looking and seeing the business model transform, and they're desperately grappling for relevancy, and private cloud is one way to achieve that. Having said it, is there a reason to have private cloud? Yeah, there is, and so you've got to look at what some of your business requirements are. I mean, when you move to public cloud, you get all these things that are important, right? So scalability, elastic stretching of my servers and compute as I need them, supposedly lower cost, so that's really not necessarily correct. But when you really sit down, again, looking at your business requirements, maybe you have data sovereignty is an issue, right? You've got a requirement to keep data in country, and a public cloud vendor may not map well to that. Or perhaps you have an application that is a classic dinosaur application, kind of a mainframe type thing that's going to run forever, and it uses quite a bit of compute and storage. When you sit down and you cost that out, it probably would make a lot of sense to just keep it in your existing data center and not look at moving it. Two other things I think are important to keep in mind about private cloud also is IoT and what we call edge computing. So you've got IoT proliferating everywhere. And a real world example is I was chatting with some compadres of mine who are work for the Colorado Department of Transportation, and they're investing incredibly heavily into a smart highway project. And so they're equipping all of on this one test section of highway, they have a massive amounts of sensor data that is being collected. And so they're looking for the cheapest and most effective way to use and analyze that data, and shoving it all up into an Amazon instance in the Pacific Northwest is not effective. So that's where localized public clouds or edge computing devices can become important. And I think you even see the public cloud providers acknowledging that. You've got Microsoft with their Azure stack, and you've got AWS with their Outpost, I think it's called, where this is, hey, we're going to extend the public cloud into your private cloud, but you still use Amazon or Microsoft as your back end, as it were.
Yeah, that's a really interesting use case, and I think it certainly lends itself well to what you're describing there. And I think you talk about the private cloud in terms of sometimes there's really just situations where it doesn't make sense for your business to go into a quote unquote public cloud. And coming from a organization that provided hosted services both on the hosting and DR side, which was ultimately acquired by Intervision, we saw that, right? Law firms, healthcare, other organizations that maybe wanted to get out of the data center business, but weren't yet ready to go into an AWS, Azure, or GCP, or their workload just really didn't lend itself to it.
Yeah, or they had security, privacy requirements
Yes.
that they just don't want to expose that data. And I think that's really important. I would also add a couple other, I don't want to say edge cases, but if you're dealing with low latency applications, right? So manufacturing shop floor, that type of thing,
Hmm.
you definitely want to take, if you can, and pick up your application and make it a cloud-based application, which has nothing to do with locality, but everything to do with your development methodology and life cycle. But keep it in your internal private cloud so that you can obviously keep your shop floor going and not have to be dependent on a data center 300 miles away that really goes down, but when it does, it puts you out of business.
Yeah, exactly. So you mentioned hardware providers. One of the things that I've been impressed with lately is the companies like your Palo Alto Networks, NetApp, F5, some of the hardware vendors that are really bringing some interesting solutions to the table around cloud and beginning to see that transition go well. So would just love your take on what you're seeing there in terms of things that are really compelling and people should be thinking about as they're maybe working towards taking what was maybe a data center and creating that next step into the cloud.
I think it's really important that people go into looking at cloud adoption with their eyes wide open and recognize that no platform is going to be 100% and that no platform is a panacea. And so Amazon will tell you that, but I don't think people necessarily hear it. And so when you look at moving to the cloud, you've got to think about the fact you've got the exact same set of overall security requirements, data confidentiality, backup requirements, DR requirements in the cloud as you do in your data center. You just address them in different ways. So things like a Palo Alto firewall are just as critical in the cloud as they are in the data center. You are going to use them differently, but you still need them. Or to think that just because you put something in AWS or Azure or GCP, give everybody equal time there, you have this magic DR solution because it's in the cloud. I mean, that's an absolute fallacy. You as a business have got to sit down and make sure your data is protected and you have a real solid backup strategy using tools from the cloud vendor, but then also tools from classic providers like Veeam or Azerto, and then map that to an actual DR as a service implementation, which, a little shameless plug here, but this is what companies like the one that you came from and we acquired help you do. And that is so important. You can't just shove it up there and think, oh, I'm safe and I'm protected and nobody's going to get to me, because it's absolutely not true, as we've seen by some pretty significant hacks that have occurred in the last 6 months.
Yeah, definitely, absolutely. So let's start to talk about, you've hit on, I think you've and certainly hinted towards some of the things to be cognizant of in the evaluation process, but let's talk about, how do you choose your cloud as an organization?
Well, as I alluded to a little bit earlier, I think the first thing you have to do is you have to sit down and, number one, understand your infrastructure and your business requirements. So you've got to look at, what do you own today from a technology perspective, both the compute, the storage, the application. What is it? What platforms does it run on? How is it coded? Where are you in your life cycle? So Gartner went through and created this whole mode one, mode two, and mode one companies were classic, traditional stovepipe oriented. Mode two were kind of these crazy born in the cloud types. And that actually is important, because you've got to understand how you're going to make that cloud journey, and then what vendor is going to help you make it successfully. So are you going to just pick up your applications and move them into the cloud? And maybe you do that as a start, right? Just because you've got to get out of a data center, or you're just tired of paying the fixed costs to keep it where it's being kept. But you're not going to realize any advantages from a cost or development or business efficiency perspective if you do that. So That's number one. What is it that we want to move? Why are we moving it? And what do we want to get out of it? And then what's the best way to make that happen? And only after you've done that. And, frankly, most companies don't have the internal staff, resource wise or even knowledge wise, to make that decision on their own, and they really need to turn to service providers that can help them do it. And then once you've done that mapping, then you go and you take and you bring that up against the cloud vendors. And right, so going back to our conversation, we have a customer here in LA that has massive amounts of Oracle databases, and that data contains years of data surrounding the particular segment of the healthcare industry that they're in. And frankly, Oracle Cloud makes a lot of sense for them. So that's the second thing, is to take your business requirements and then map it against the big, I'll say 5 vendors, because I kind of exclude Alibaba if you're a US based company, and see which one fits, and not just go, oh, we should be going to AWS because they're the biggest.
I love your take on vendor lock-in. So what are your thoughts there?
Besides the fact that it's inevitable, so sit back and accept it. I mean, vendor lock-in right. This is something that, unless you were, outside of the IBM mainframe days when they were the only one in town, once the mini computer era showed up with the DEC and some of the other players, all of a sudden vendor lock-in was this evil thing, and you had to avoid it, mostly because that's what IBM did to you. And then along came the networking world, and that's what Cisco did to you. The reality is you can't avoid vendor lock-in to a pretty significant degree. I mean, everybody was talking about hybrid cloud, and there are definitely people that do hybrid cloud. And, frankly, I think you should, in one sense, embrace multiple cloud vendors. But I don't know that you do it to avoid vendor lock-in. I think you do it to get the best of what those vendors have to offer. I mean, if you look at AWS, right, the 800-pound gorilla, you use AWS's tools, or you use third-party tools, and they prevent that lock-in, supposedly. But when you think about the development cycle and getting code out the door to drive the business forward, which is the whole reason that IT exists, many, 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 many times those AWS or Azure or GCP tools are a heck of a lot better and easier to use. So I think you can't ignore vendor lock-in, but you can't put a stake in the ground and say, I'm never going to let myself get locked into whatever piece of technology that I'm evaluating, because sometimes there's a lot of good reasons to get locked in.
Yeah, I can absolutely see that. So just to put a bow on things, go into wrap-up mode, Kevin, what's the one call to action you would give to our listeners as they're considering their own cloud journey?
The number one thing is to be honest with yourselves as an organization. Take a mirror, look into it, and ask the really difficult questions and try and answer them with candor. Do I have, as an entity, the skill sets to do this by myself? If I do I have the time and the resources? If I don't, go out, examine the market, look for partners that have a solid, proven track record and can help you make your cloud journey successful. Because all too often, companies start down that road and they start a lift and shift, or go down one of those development paths without the right resources, without the right skill sets, and they fail. So if you come to the decision that you need a partner, make sure you do the research. Make sure you find a partner that really understands cloud and especially understands migration and how you get there and how you do it in a successful manner. And you want to look at companies that have a significant and serious track record.
Awesome. Well, Kevin, thank you so much for joining us. Wonderful conversations as usual. So thanks for your time today.
Well, thank you very much. It's a pleasure. I love having these discussions, and hopefully anybody listening to this wants to continue these discussions. We're here to talk with you.
Thank you, everyone, for listening, and make sure to check out more episodes on intervision.com.
You've been listening to the Status Go podcast. You can subscribe on iTunes or get more information at intervision.com. If you'd like to contribute to the conversation, find Intervision on Facebook, LinkedIn, or Twitter. Thank you for listening. Until next time.